Okay, in this video I'm going to explain how to create a AngularJS app using Angular 1 and I'm going to explain how to do a basic hello world app, but I'm going to do it in the format of using Gulp to actually deploy it and test it locally. So it's a bit more complicated than a hello world app because it's going to focus on the kind of deployment side of it and how you would create a project that is that you can actually use and have the knowledge to kind of build work on projects in a commercial environment. Because I find that a lot of the hello world apps that are out there, or a lot of the kind of basic introductory videos, they focus on making a very simple app, but they don't focus at all on the file structure or the folders or anything like that. So it's not going to be too complicated, but it's going to be a little bit more complicated than just creating a simple hello world app. So yeah, for this tutorial, we're going to use Angular, Gulp, and Browsersync to display to update the browser in real time when we make changes to our app as we're developing. And we're going to use NPM, no package manager, to manage the packages. So if you don't have it already, then just open your browser and go over to make sure that you have the latest version of Node installed. So if you just go to Google and search Node.js, you got this here. So you basically just need to download the relevant one for your machine and install that. I would recommend using the version 6.9.1 or the LTS version, the long-term support version. So yeah, once that's installed, you're pretty much ready to go. So I'm going to start by opening my terminal and heading over to my workspace, which is just a file on my computer, which I like to keep apps. Basically I keep all my code in one place on the computer, so I know where everything is. So I'm going to go into the demo directory, which I created earlier. If you don't have a directory, then you make one. So I'm going to start by running mkdir. We'll call it hello world, even though it's a bit more complicated than hello world, but we'll call it hello world, and then just cd into that directory. I'm just going to change my terminal color here. That's better. Okay, cool. So we've got our directory. This will be our workspace. I'm just going to go and open that up in Atom now. So Atom's the editor which I'm going to be using. I recommend using Atom just to keep it kind of standard as you're following along. Atom's a great editor and it's really easy to use. And if you have it installed, you just type atom dot. It will load up Atom in the directory that you are in. So that's quite a useful feature because I like to use the command line to navigate. So you can see we have our blank directory here. So the first thing we want to do is initialize this as an NPM repository. So if you type npm init, and what this does is it will ask us some questions about the project, and it will create a package.json file, which is the file that npm uses to hold all the kind of metadata about our project, so all the dependencies, all the information about our project, it stores in the package.json file. So I'm just going to leave all of this as default. So it's asking us the name, the version, a description, the entry point, which we don't need to worry about for now, and then test commands, git repository, all that stuff. So we'll just leave all that default, and then we'll say yes, that's okay. Okay, so now that that's done, you can see in Atom here, you've got the package.json file. And if we open that, it basically just populated the file with the details that we provided earlier, or that we provided when it asked us the questions. Okay, so now that we have our NPM repository initialized, let's take the next step, which is to install the required packages that we need for this project. So I'm going to use the bare minimum packages that we need to get a simple kind of deployment going, where we have AngularJS as the framework installed, and we have Gulp and the Gulp packages that we need to kind of have a very basic entry level deployment But I'll explain a bit later why it's useful for you to know this, because when you're in, you find this incredibly useful once you go into a commercial job and you work in a company and they have an Angular app. You'll find that it's a bit more, the deployment process complicates things a bit more than they would teach you in kind of a standard Hello World video. So the first dependency we're going to install is Angular. So to install it, we type npm install, and then if you type -- save, what that will do is it will tell it to save this dependency into our package.json file. So you can install it without the save, but then you don't have a record of what you've installed in your project. And when somebody else needs to run the same project, or you need to run the same project on a different machine, you won't have all the dependencies listed in the package.json file. So we're going to type npm install save, and then the name of the package, which I believe is Angular. There you go. Okay, so Angular is installed. Let's just check. So you can see it's created this node modules directory here, and that's what Angular basically, that's what npm does to. It keeps all of the packages and all the dependencies in this node modules folder. So if you are committing this from If you're committing this to Git, then you want to add the node modules to the Git ignore. So now that we've installed Angular, now we're going to install another Angular module called Angular root. And Angular root will allow us to basically create routes. So that's create like a URL and map that to a specific page in our app. So let's do npm install, and then we'll do the save again. So it saves, and we'll type Angular root. So it's npm install -- save, and then the package name, which is Angular root. So let's install that. There you go. That one's installed. And now, so that's the dependencies we need for our actual app. Now we're going to install the dependencies we need for the kind of local development and the deployment of the app. So as I said, we're going to use Gulp. So let's type npm install, and then what we do here is instead of typing just save, we type save dev, because this is a development dependency of the app. So this module that we're installing now, Gulp, isn't required for the live running of the application. It's just required for the development and the deployment of the app. So it's not actually going to be deployed. The user's not going to have access to this module when they're using our app, or it's not going to be running in the background. This is only going to be running when we're developing, and it's only for our benefit and to make the kind of process of developing and deploying the app easier. So any dependency like that isn't for the actual, that isn't used as a core library for the app, is called you do save dev. So then later on, when you install, you have the choice whether you just want to install the application modules or the development modules, or both. So we'll do save dev, and we'll type Gulp. So while that's installing, it can take a few seconds. I'll just open up the package.json file here, and you can see that it's added the dependencies that we did because we click save, and you can see it's installed lots of dependencies for Gulp, because there's a lot of things that Gulp depends on. So you got the dev dependencies here because we specified the save dev, and we install Gulp, and then we've got our two Angular ones. So we'll just install a couple more. The next one's going to be npm install save dev. We're going to install Gulp-concat. So that's short for Gulp concatenate. And what that does is it allows us to put all of our files or concatenate files together. So we can take all of our JavaScript files, and instead of a kind of traditional app or some of the projects that I've seen that I've worked on in the past, I've looked at the kind of the index.html file, and it's got like 50 different script tags where it's imported these files, and it just means that every time you create a new JavaScript file in your Angular app, you need to import that into the HTML document, and then you need to kind of remember that you've imported it, and if you forget to import it, then you can run into issues. And So what this Gulp-concat will allow us to do is merge all of those files into one file, so you can just and it will do that automatically for you. Gulp will do that automatically for you, and then you just import that one file into your project and you're good to go. So there's one final dependency that we're going to install, npm install, again it's a dev dependency, and this one's called Browsersync. So I was introduced to Browsersync while working for the latest client I'm working for, and basically it's quite a useful tool because it allows you to, it gives you a web browser, it gives you a web server that will run your app on your machine, but it would also it has this extra cool features where it will when you make changes, it will detect a change and it will automatically refresh the browser, so you don't need to keep rerunning the server or refreshing the page or whatever. It in real time will automatically update. And even better than that, something that really impressed me was that the CSS, if you change the CSS, it will just refresh the styles of the page. It won't actually refresh the entire page. So let's say you're developing an Angular app with a form that you fill out, and then every time you're making a CSS style for the form with content in it, and then every time you change the file of it, refresh the whole page. You might have to re-enter the fields every time to see what it looks like, whereas this will just change the CSS in the background, and it will update real time. It's really, really cool. So we'll install that, Browsersync, and then you can see that it's added all of these, and these are basically the name of the packages that it's installed, and this is the version that it's installed. So it will say this basically says install this version or higher. So now that's installed, now we can move on to the next step. So I think a next logical step in our project is to create a file structure. So as I was saying earlier, I always found that when doing even more than just hello world, when it's like an in-depth tutorial of how to do things in Angular, for example, the ones that were on the AngularJS website, I found that it teaches you how to use the different features of the framework and how to the syntax and how to kind of create a basic app and get it working. But it doesn't teach you anything in regards to how you should lay the structure out, your file structure out, how you should organize your different modules and separate it in a way that's scalable, so that you can actually go from doing this simple hello world style app, and then you can actually build on top of that and build a proper application that you can then go and deploy on a server, and you can use Jenkins to automate the deployment or something like that. So let's create the file structure. So I like to keep things as simple as possible. So we'll create a new folder, and this we'll call this src for source code, and this is where all of the source code for the app is going to go. So everything that we do in the app is going to be in here, and inside source code we're going to split this up into CSS for our cascading style sheets, or the styles, JS for our JavaScript files, and templates for our HTML template files. Okay, so now we have a kind of basic structure of how we're going to, so we know we're going to put all of our CSS in here, we're going to put all of our JavaScript in here, and we're going to put all of our templates, our HTML files in here. So the thing with the deployment that I found is that, or the thing that I found whilst working in commercial projects, is it's never, you always want to, there's always these extra things that you want to do to your source code to get it ready for deployment. So for example, you might want to minify the code so that's where it basically shortens every string to the shortest possible string, but also keeps it unique and goes through and just removes, gives the code the smallest footprint possible, because that's very important when you're running down browsers. You want to have minimal file size. So basically you want to minify the CSS, you want to minify the JavaScript, you want to do all these things to the code, and also concatenate the files together into one, so like one CSS file, one JavaScript file, and things like that. So you would never actually, this was something I didn't understand when I first started learning Angular, was you never actually run the project from these files that you create. So there's always some processing that goes on, and it takes, basically, there needs to be some kind of worker that, or some script that goes and it takes your files and then it places it into like what we call a dist, which is I guess a distribution directory. And then that inside that file is what you run. But you won't develop directly into that file because, as you can imagine, it's not a nice experience if you have to develop in a kind of, well, a minified or a concatenated CSS or JavaScript file. It's nice to have everything separated and split up as opposed to have everything in one file. So there's kind of a disconnect there between the code that you actually write and the code that gets deployed and ran on the server, which is ran in a kind of efficient way. So the way we're gonna bridge that gap is we're going to use Gulp. And so before we set up our Gulp file, we're just going to create a styles.json file. So we're going to create two JSON files. One's called styles, and this is in the root of the directory. And one's called, so we've got styles and scripts. And the reason we want to separate these JSON files out is because we want to describe not just what our working files are, so what our JavaScript files are and our CSS files are, but also of any external libraries which we want to include. We want to be able to easily include them in our project that gets compiled into the distribution directory and then gets ready to be basically put on a server. So what we're going to do is we're going to create two JSON files here. So we've got scripts and styles, and it's just going to contain an array, a JSON array of, this one's going to be the scripts, the JavaScript files that we're going to run, and this one is going to be the styles. So basically, let's start with the scripts. So the first thing we're going to include is we're going to include Angular. That's the most, that needs to be the first dependency in our project because that's everything's going to run on Angular. So right at the top of the list, we're going to type node modules /angular/angular.js. Oops. Okay, so that actually maps into this node modules directory, and then if you come down and you find Angular, you see this angular.js there. So we're going to use the standard file. We're not going to use the minified one because we're actually going to the reason we're setting it up this way is so that we can add the minification ourselves and we can compile it all into one JavaScript file instead of having separate files imported in the whole project. So let's start by adding Angular, and then we're going to add the second Angular dependency, which was it was node module /angular root, which was, again, it was the dependency for the routing, so we can create URLs and stuff. And then the next one we're going to do, so that's our external dependencies that we've installed through the Node Package Manager. And finally, we're going to add our source code. So we said that we're going to put all of our source code in the JS file here. So what we do is we'll go src/js/ and then we do ***. That means everything, no matter what the name is, /star.js. So this star syntax basically just means any JavaScript file in here with under any subdirectory. This is what the double stars mean. It means go any, or the depth of all the subdirectories. Take every JS file, and that's what we want basically. So this JSON file is going to serve as a pointer, or it's going to be the list that Gulp uses to when we say Gulp, compile everything into one file, and these are the files that we want compiled basically. So save that, and then come over to the styles.json file. In this case, in our actual app, we actually just need one, which is our styles, because we don't have any external dependencies that require style sheets. But let's say, for example, we wanted to use a very popular one, Bootstrap. Then you would include Bootstrap here at the top, and it takes it in the order that you specify it. But in our case, we're just going to use under src/css, and then in the same way we did for the JavaScript, we're going to do the same for the CSS, where we're going to do the styles. So we're going to say any CSS file we put in here, take that in any of the subdirectories. So then we can organize the files in subdirectories if we want. So if we want to break down our styles into separate individual files, then we can do that. And it'll make our code a lot easier to kind of read and understand. And it's nice to have it broken down into chunks as opposed to having one big CSS file or one big JavaScript file. Okay, so now that we've created the scripts and the styles file directory, JSON file, we can move on to the actual the Gulp file. So Gulp file is just a JavaScript file, and that's what Gulp looks at to run when you type the Gulp commands into the Gulp CLI. It looks for the Gulp file to figure out what to do. So Gulp file is really useful because this is something that you will use over and over again, and it's basically the automation of your app. So this is where the automation happens, and you define what you want to be automated, and then it takes care of that for you. So the first thing you do is at the top of the Gulp file, you include the dependencies. So we're going to include the 3 dev dependencies. If you remember when we installed them earlier in the package.json, there's these 3. We're going to install them, we're going to include them starting with the Gulp. So const stands for constant, which is the same as a variable, but it can't be changed. Although in JavaScript it actually can be changed, but you just shouldn't change it. You kind of, when you define a constant, you're signifying that should stay constant throughout the whole script. So we'll include that with the Gulp, and then the require, and then we'll do Gulp, and then we'll do concat, Gulp-concat, and then we'll do Browsersync. And then the Browsersync takes create, and that creates the web server that we're going to use. Okay, so these in the require, it basically maps to what we have in our package.json file. So you see it has Gulp, see it has Gulp-concat and Browsersync. It maps exactly to that. So that's where we're getting that from. Okay, and now we're going to include our scripts and our styles file that we created earlier. So include scripts. Actually, we don't need the JSON. And then we'll include the styles. Okay, great. So we've got our includes, and now the next stage is we're going to add a variable which will determine whether we're in the develop mode or we're not in the develop mode. So this will be used. So I'll explain what this is going to be used in a second. So we'll just do dev mode equals false. So it starts by default is false, and it means that if we set it to true, we can change certain behaviors in the deployment. So let's say, for example, we wanted to include, we didn't want to minify when we're in dev mode, because sometimes it's nice to use, well, in fact, always it's nice to use the Chrome developer tools and like go in and inspect the elements and have it in a non-minified version that you can easily and quickly read and understand. So this is how, when we're running our tasks, which we're going to define now, the Gulp tasks, you can use the dev mode boolean, that's what it is, boolean, to determine whether we're running in dev mode or whether it's being ran for a live deployment. Okay, so the first task that we're going to create, now we're going to create various Gulp tasks that are going to be used during our workflow, that are used to automate the workflow. So the first Gulp task we're going to make is the CSS. So we're going to do gulp.task, and we're going to call it CSS, and we're going to define it as a function. And this is going to say this is going to tell Gulp what to do when with the CSS files, basically. So this is going to process our CSS files. So what we're going to do is we're going to do gulp.src, that's gulp source, and then styles. So that styles is going to take this constant, which is coming from our predefined list of styles that we defined earlier here. So we're going to do gulp styles, and then we're going to do pipe. So the way gulp works is you kind of you take one you tell it to do one thing, and it does it, and then it takes the output and you pipe that into another thing. So you can pipe as many things as you want. So in this section is where you would add kind of minification or whatever, anything extra that Gulp can do, which is a lot of different things. You would add them here in this list if you wanted them to happen to your CSS well. So the first thing we want to do is we want to concatenate all the files. So we're going to use Gulp-concat. This is basically it says concat and then main.css. So this is the output file name. So you can call this whatever you want: style.css, main.css, abacus.css, whatever you want. So we'll do that first. So we'll concatenate it, and then we'll set a gulp.dest, which is destination, and we're going to put it in a dist/css folder. So it's basically going to take our CSS styles that we list in our styles.json. It's going to concatenate them into this one main. So it's not concatenating the name, the URLs. It's actually going to go and read the file and concatenate the actual contents of the files into main.css. And then we're going to dump it in this dist/css. So in the end, it will be dist/css, then /main.css. Okay, great. So finally, what we're going to do is we're going to pipe, and we're going to do Browsersync. So this is going to tell it to reload our browser when we're developing in the background, so it doesn't. We don't have to refresh the page. So this is the bit that says basically run the Browsersync and automatically reload when we call this task. Okay, so that's CSS. So the next one is JavaScript. So we're going to do gulp.task, and we're just going to call this JS, and we're going to do again a function. And then we're going to do exactly the same as we did with CSS. We're going to use scripts, and we're going to pipe, and we're going to concatenate. Let's call it scripts.js. Concatenate that into scripts.js, and then we're going to do pipe gulp.dest destination, and we're going to put this one in. We're going to put this one in dist/JS for JavaScript. Actually, we should put a / here to prefix to say that take it from the current directory. Some things can be funny about that. You know, sometimes you don't need it, sometimes you do. I just find it's better to put it. So now that we've so we piped into that destination, and now we're going to do pipe. We're going to add the Browsersync also to our JavaScript. Reload. And we're going to do stream true. So stream is to reload in the background. I believe that's what it means. I looked through the documentation of Browsersync, and I couldn't find proper definitions for the options, but I believe stream is where it streams the change in the background, and it refreshes the page when it detects when this task triggers. Okay, so we've done our JS, we've done our CSS, so now we're going to do our HTML. So gulp.task HTML function, and this is going to work a little bit differently because we don't have a list of HTML files, because I don't think there's ever a case where you have an external library that you would include their HTML files. I've never come across that. So you always do the HTML yourself, and then the only things you would include from external modules is either JavaScript or CSS. So we're gonna use our instead of using a JSON file for this, we can simply just do gulp.src and we can put the location directly in this part, because we're never going to need to add more unless you want to put your files in other areas, in your HTML files in others, but I wouldn't recommend that. I'll try and keep it all in the same directory. So what we'll do is gulp.src and then we'll put the sources there, and then we're going to pipe pipe gulp.dest, and this one we're going to just put directly inside the dist file, because we want our index file and stuff to be inside, like in the root of the directory, because that's what the entry point to our app will be, the index file. So we're going to set that as just dist. We're not going to put that in any subdirectory, and then the base of our app is the HTML files. So we have the HTML files, and then we have the JavaScript files, which are run on top of them and use them as the kind of with the framework and everything on top. So we'll put the HTML files in the dist, and then we'll also add pipe browsersync.reload stream true. Actually, I'm putting colons at the end, and these are, you don't need to put colons at the end of these because you're making a JavaScript object. Okay, so, and then you do need a colon there though. Okay, so now that's done. So now we've created the three main components of our app: it's CSS, the JavaScript, and the templates files, or the HTML. So in CSS, we've done the bare minimum, which is just concatenate them into one file. But you could also add minification. You can add different browser tags and stuff. You can do all sorts with that, and you can actually compile Sass or some other, or less or something in that section as well. So if you're interested to know more about that, then perhaps let me know in the comments. I can do another video at some point to explain that in more detail. And the same with JavaScript, we're just doing the minimum here. We're just concatenating it, but we could also add minification and stuff in this section here. And the same with the HTML. So now we've done those three, then the next thing is so we have a task that does a CSS, we have a task that does a JavaScript, we have a task that does a HTML. The next step is to kind of create a task that does all of them, because we don't want to have to run each one every time we do something. In fact, we don't want to have to run them all. So we just want to run one command that starts our development server, starts listening in the background, and does all the updates in the background for us, so we can save time refreshing pages and doing all that stuff. So the first thing we're going to do is a build task. So build is what's going to actually build our app. So it's going to build our project when you run that. So this is what would be ran on like a Jenkins server or something when it deploys them to when it's preparing our project to deploy it to the actual server. So what you do in the build is you just define a task called build, and then instead of doing like .src, you do gulp.star, and then you can provide an array list of other tasks that you have. So when you run build, it's going to run the tasks that we specify here. So we're going to choose all of our tasks. We're going to say we're going to do the CSS, we're going to do the JS, and we're going to do the HTML. And there you go. That's all you need for the build. And then the next step is the browser sync. So this is going to start our browser sync server. So we do gulp.task task with a K on L. Browser sync function. So in the browser sync, what we're going to do is we're just going to use browser sync.init for initialize. And give it null, and then we're going to go open false server, and then so we're going to say start as a server and set the base dir to dist, the distribution directory. And there you go. There's your browser sync task. So now we're going to create now we're going to create a final task, which we're going to use when we want to start our development server. So we're just going to call it start. Some people call it dev. You can call it whatever you like. But this task, what it's going to do is it's going to say dev mode equals true. So we haven't actually used the dev mode boolean in any of these yet, but the point is that you set it up so that you could use it when you want to. So when you add stuff like minification and you do all those things in these sections, you can use a gulp if to say if dev mode is true, then do this. If not, then don't do this, basically. So it just gives you more control over that. It's good to do it from the beginning, so you set up for when you do go to, even if you're not doing it at this stage in the development, when you're about to launch, you can kind of seamlessly add that. So in this section, we're going to do gulp.start. So when we run start, what we wanted to do is we wanted to first of all build the project. Actually, this needs to be list. So the first thing we wanted to do is build. And the second thing we wanted to do is browser sync. So start our browser sync server so that we can actually have a server that we can test our project on. So that's the start, and that's great. So that would give us a that would build the project, and it would run a server that's listening in that directory or the dist directory that it's built to. The next thing we're going to use is a gulp watch. Now this is where it gets cool, because this is what really saves you the time, because you can do gulp watch, and what it says is it says watch this directory for changes. So we're going to say watch CSS for any files of CSS, and if that changes at all, if you save or whatever a new file and you delete a file or whatever it changes, run CSS again. So what that's going to do is when it detects a change, it's going to run this. It's going to run this task, and this task is going to go through these. It's going to rebuild it, and then it's going to synchronize it, reload it with browser sync. So that's what's going to save us time. So we're going to do that for the JS, and we are going to do that for the HTML or the templates. So src/templates HTML. Okay, and then run HTML. There you go. So that's our gulp file set up. Perfect. So that's ready to go. Now what we can do is we can test this now. So let's see what happens if you go back to your command line, you type gulp dev, or sorry, it was we use gulp. You see it's looked for a task, and because we don't have a task called dev, it's failed. It says task dev is not in your gulp file. So we actually want gulp start. So there you go. Actually, it's done something. So you can see here that it's running the server on this localhost 3000. And if you look here, it's actually created our dist. And we don't have any files in here yet, so it's not going to be any good navigating there for now. But what we'll do is we can just do Control-C to close that while we continue, and just build the rest of something that we can actually use to demo this. Okay, so now that the kind of deployment is set up, we're going to actually get into the fun part, which is to actually create our project, create something that we can do, create our Angular app. So what we'll do is we'll start with the index.html file. That's always a good place to start, because that's always, in most cases, it should be the root of your application. So what we'll do is we'll give it a doc type HTML. And we'll give it a HTML lang equals English, and then here you say your Angular app. So we'll call this hello world app. That's where you define which what the name of the Angular app is going to be, and then we'll give it a head. So this is really a bare minimum skeleton HTML file here. So we'll call this a proper Angular hello world app. Okay, cool. So we got our title and now link, and this is the brilliant part of this, or the fantastic part of this, is that you only need to import one style sheet. So if you haven't worked on many projects so or any commercial project so far, you probably wouldn't have ran into this problem. But in some commercial projects, you would just have a list of like not usually with style sheets, but it's usually with the JavaScript files. So we'll just add them next. Underneath the head, we'll add a body. And then at the bottom, just after the body tag, so in the body tag, we'll add our view, ng-view, class equals view. This is the view is what's going to take our the content of our templates that we create next. And then we'll include scripts, src, js/scripts.js. Yeah, so when I discovered Gulp, this was my favorite part, was that now instead of having I've seen projects where there's like 50 and above JavaScript imports, because you break your controllers down into separate files, and then you end up with, you've got your controllers, your services, your external dependencies, and you've got to import each one individually as a script tag, and it's just crazy. You end up with so many that it's a job on its own. It's a full-time job itself just to manage the list of scripts that you need to import in your project. So the beauty of this is that we just define the scripts in here, and we can use the wildcards to import multiple at the same time, so we don't need to specify each one individually. And then it just compiles it into one single script file, which we'll run into our app, and we'll show you in a sec. So now that we've created an index file, let's create like a kind of a home page. And what I like to do is you at this point, the good thing about this is it doesn't matter. The structure doesn't matter too much because we're using wildcards to copy the files, so and to merge the files together. So for the JavaScript and CSS, you don't really need to worry. You can create a folder structure as deep as you want or as shallow as you want, and split it up as much as you want, and you never have to worry about sticking it all together somehow. But I like to separate my templates into views. So views are like pages, like kind of high-level pages. So you have your index page, which is the root that loads with in the body tag, and then you have your views, which are like pages of our app, and then you can also create one for directives as well. And then in views you can create subdirectories, but we're not going to do that for now. We're just going to create inside views. We're going to create a home, just a home.html. And this home.html, we're just going to give it a h1, and then we're going to give it a message in the h1. So it's a very standard, simple app. Okay. So now we've done our templates. We can move on to the JavaScript files inside JS. So what we'll do is we'll create new JavaScript file, and it's going to be the root JavaScript file of our app. It's going to be called app.js. So we basically create our app.js. The first thing you do in an Angular project is you define an Angular module, and you've got to give it the same name as we gave at the top of the templates file earlier. So at the top of the index file, you've got your hello world app. You want to give that, put the same name, match the module name there. And we need to remember this because this is going to be the module that we're going to use for each part of the each controller and everything that we create after. It's going to use that module reference. So we're going to use these square brackets here to create a to define the external libraries that we're going to use within our app. So you can have multiple external libraries. Angular has, that's the great thing about Angular, is it has so many, such a great community of developers who build these libraries that can help save you time and stuff like directives and things like that. So we're going to use the one that we installed, which was ng-root. And then under the ng-root, so root is the router, which is the module that routes the URLs to a specific page. Underneath that, we're going to do a config, and again we're going to use the square brackets, and we're going to include root provider, and then in function, I'm going to choose a root provider. So just to explain something that I recently figured out, not too recently, but you know, when I figured it out, I was like, oh, that makes sense. You can just define a function directly in it and get rid of these square brackets completely. The reason people use these square brackets, the reason to use these square brackets basically duplicate this code, because that's what you're doing here, is we wrote this twice. The reason you write it twice is for when you minify the code. Because Angular is an injection based framework, the names are very important. So it looks here and it's like, oh, this function we've asked for a root provider, so then it injects a root provider into it. When it minifies the code, for example, it might change this to just R, because it uses the minimal text that it requires for all the variable names and stuff. And that would break because Angular requires a name to be full. So that means that minification will work. So that's why you include these string versions of it above around this around this curly brackets or square brackets. So anyway, moving on. We're just going to have one root for our project. So the root provider dot when. So when we ask for the /, which is the root of the project, we're going to say, show this template. So we want it to show the home.html and use this controller. Home, we're going to make a controller in a bit called home controller. Okay, great. So this is all we need for our root. So for every page that you have in your app, you would add a new root. So you just chain these below, like when you can do .lol, whatever you want. Like you basically just keep adding as many as you want, and you map them to templates and to controllers. So the next step is we are going to actually make a controller. So we go back to our JavaScript. So this is where the scalability comes in, because like I was saying at the beginning of the video, it's kind of I find that a lot of the tutorials don't go into the don't set your teach in a way where it's like think about scalability in mind and think about like what happens how would you actually do it in a workplace when you're working for a company and you need a commercial grade kind of app. So that's where this comes in. You basically create. I separate my JavaScript into controllers, and then you put them in different directories. So if you got if you can modularize your app as much as possible, then that's what you do here. So for this one, we only need one directory, controllers, and then we can put our controllers in there. But if your app's bigger, you might want to even go deeper than that and put like group them by different areas of the app or something like that. Group them in a way that makes sense, but in a way that you can break your app up enough that it's easy to use. So inside the controller, we're going to make a thing called home CTRL. And again, I think you should be able to see the file and know what the controller is. I see some developers, they'll give different names than the actual controller itself. But I just think it's always best to just if you got a home controller and if a file contains a home controller, then it should be called home controller. Keep the name the same as the module, and break down the modules into individual files. Don't have like multiple controllers in one file, because it's just an absolute nightmare to manage. And probably a reason why people would do that in the past is because you have to individually import each one. But now we don't have to do that because Gulp takes care of that by merging them together. So we're going to call it our Hello World app. This basically needs to be consistent across the board. So if you have different names here, then it won't work. You need to have a consistent module that you're working with. So it's basically we're going to add a controller to our module. And in the controller, in the same way we did before, we use the square brackets, but we're going to import the scope. So the scope is the variables which are shared across it's the way that the controller can communicate with or share data with the template. So if you remember earlier, we defined inside our home.html, we define this message. So if we can basically set that value in here. So scope.message equals awesome. So yeah, the message we're going to see when that loads is going to be awesome. Okay, so now that that's done, we actually have everything we need, where we should be able to run gulp start, and we should have an app. So let's go to our browser, and let's navigate to the URL it says. So it's this. I can just type that. Localhost 3000. It cannot get. So for some reason it hasn't built our project. So let's see why that is. If we go into Gulp file, why hasn't it built our project? Because you can see here at the dist, it's taken our scripts and it's compiled them, but it hasn't done the rest of the stuff. So something must be missing from the Gulp file. Which is CSS, JavaScript, HTML. Okay, so let's try Gulp build, see what that does. Let's try and delete that. It didn't work. Concat main. Okay. src/css, that's correct. So we have build is there. Try that. Gulp build says it ran the tasks, so it definitely is running the correct tasks. Test. Okay, so the JavaScript works perfectly. Guess that's there. Well, the CSS, there isn't any CSS, so that's why CSS isn't working. Silly me, we haven't added any CSS. If we add a main dot or a test.css here, even if we leave that blank, then that will work. Okay, so the problem is just with our HTML file. So, and the problem is I missed an S on the templates. So we got to see a bit of debugging there. Okay, so now if we do start and then refresh the page, there you go. Awesome, we have our app. And so let's demonstrate the real-time kind of changes. So if we go into our JavaScript file and we want to change the message to finally and save, it automatically updates with finally. And notice how it flickered though for a second, because it's like let's say hello world. You can see that the actual browser refreshes when we change the JavaScript file, because that's required to reload the whole page. Whereas the scripts, if we were to like do body background color blue, it didn't actually injected the CSS. You see that it actually injects the CSS, so it doesn't actually refresh the entire page, which I find is amazing, because it saves you so much time when you don't want to have to re-enter stuff on the page and you're trying to debug some CSS. It saves you so much time in doing that, because it just in the background refreshes that automatically. Yeah, so that's basically that's it for the video for today. So we've gone through how to create a basic Angular app, but in a way that you can now build on top of this app, and you can continue working on this, and you can build your own idea or your own project. So this is not just like a hello world tutorial. This is like a base or a template that you can use for your Angular apps that you make moving forward. So you've got a nice folder structure here. It builds automatically into this dist folder. And if you were working on a commercial project for a company, then when you go to deploy this, or when you build this app, you can actually set up a Jenkins job that automatically it runs gulp build, and then it builds the file into this dist, and you actually have a application that's ready to go live. Obviously, you need to add things like the minification and stuff, which we talked about, but you've got a kind of skeleton project here that allows you to do that. You would just add that into these gulp files. Cool. So yeah, I'm appreciate you watching the video. I hope you found it useful. And if you have any kind of suggestions, or you have you do it a better way or an easier way, then I would love to hear about it in the comments. I'm always interested in hearing alternative or other people's methods of doing these kind of standard day-to-day tasks, which can save you a hell of a lot of time. So thanks for watching. That's it for the video.